And I want to welcome everyone to First Children's Services webinar, Unpacking the Backpack in 2020, How to Identify and Help Students with Anxiety. And today's webinar will be presented by Jeffrey Selman, who is new to First Children's Services and who is our Vice President of Clinical Services. So before Jeff gets started, I just want to mention one last time for anyone joining us to please write your full name in the chat and your email if it's different than the one you registered with. And feel free to fill out that poll. And Jeff, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. Welcome, everybody. I understand there's a great number of teachers who are participating in this webinar, so I'm really grateful that you're all going to be here. You're our new frontline workers. You're going to be the ones that are keeping an eye on our kids, able to identify if there's any challenges that they're having. So I'm very grateful that you're taking the time now to join. I'm sure you're getting your lessons ready and getting things in order as we transition during this tricky time. The way I like to present, I'm fairly informal. So I'm going to try to keep things free of jargon. When we get to tips and strategies and recommendations, they should be simple enough to do, a tweak here or there, nothing grand as far as large-scale interventions. Our solutions need to make sense and be in real time. So we'll be talking about things to best help kids, help families, and help you as educators. I am a father of three. I chose to do this presentation at home. Hopefully I don't have any kids creeping in on here and having one of those YouTube moments. But I am a working father, so I have been on different sides of the table when it comes to navigating Zoom school and working with teachers. Professionally, I'm a licensed psychologist and a board-certified behavior analyst. My background's in school psychology, so I always enjoy working with schools and people in the community, stakeholders who are charged with working with kids. And certainly I'm having joined First Children's Services, I get to see now in New Jersey and Pennsylvania the type of needs there are. And I'm happy to be part of an organization that's putting programs in place to meet those needs. Let me see. So before we get into it, just a little bit about First Children before we get started. First Children's a unique organization. It operates in New Jersey and Pennsylvania for the most part. And we have a division of services that work with kids with autism spectrum disorder, providing ABA in schools and community and clinics and in families' homes. We have a large autism services division. Then we also have mental health services for kids and families in homes and in schools. We offer all sorts of behavioral health and mental health programming in schools for kids and for systems development. And then we have a school in Fanwood, New Jersey for kids with multiple disabilities for complex medical conditions that aren't able to be served in the home district. And then the last program, although I'm leaving out several other home-based programming and whatnot and educational initiatives, we have a program called Transitions, and I saved that for last because it's a good bridge to what we'll be talking about today. Transitions is very unique. I haven't seen too many programs like this. It's for middle schoolers and high schoolers who would otherwise be homebound or receiving home instruction because they have school phobia or school avoidance, largely because of anxiety. And we have our campus in Cherry Hill and Berlin. So certainly if this is something that is causing challenges for you in the school or for kids that you're working with, please reach out. At the very least, we can provide you some consultation. We'll be talking about school phobia today and school avoidance because it occurs with kids with anxiety and when it comes to school. Essentially, today we're going to talk about anxiety, what it looks like, different kinds of anxiety, how it presents, and then certainly in the time of COVID, what we might be seeing more of and how we can help. Just a couple of considerations as we get started. These are themes that, I'll likely come back to, but I'd like to keep it at the forefront. If you do a Google search, or you start looking through the literature, there are certain themes that are going to come up. One of those themes is, and it bears reminding that even though it's a presentation of on anxiety, not all kids are anxious. We live in a time right now where there's a lot of stress, and we're flooded with images and information about being nervous or scared. A lot of kids are resilient. A lot of kids are going to wear masks. They're going to go to school. They're going to do typical kid things. They're not going to present with anxiety. Our goal is to be proactive, to be solution focused, to be vigilant, to be able to help those kids who would otherwise be predisposed to anxiety or have presented with anxiety in the past, to make sure that we are doing everything we can to help them and serve them, and certainly look for signs. But I don't want us to have the assumption that all kids are going to be anxious right now. We need to take care of ourselves, our team. We need to think about self-care. It's interesting, when I go back and I look at some of my presentations, I usually wait until the very end to talk about self-care for teachers or parents or staff, clinicians. And when you go through these articles, there's always this little snippet at the end about self-care. It's imperative, especially in a time like this, that we are monitoring our own emotional and behavioral reactions, that we're staying positive and we're taking care of our health. And we'll be talking about that throughout. And the last thing, and certainly if I'm working with folks who work with kids and with families, you all know, we need to continue to be understanding and compassionate. We can't, again, assume or expect our parents, us as parents, to just know how to homeschool, know how to follow curriculum, know what's best from the educational standpoint. We know our teachers go through extensive training and coursework, and continuing ed, in order to be excellent teachers. And just like we want to be compassionate and understanding for families and everything they're going through, we should expect the same for our educators and our teachers, to understand that they have to go home and be real people, in addition to being educators and dealing with everything we're dealing with right now. So these are themes we'll keep coming back to. So as a clinical psychologist, I've done a lot of work in private practice. And when families come in, they want to know what's happening with their kid. One of the best ways I've found to describe anxiety in presentations like this is talk about what families tell me in the office. So these are common quotes or anecdotes that I've heard as I try to figure out what might be happening. And anxiety is tricky. It could look like ADHD. It could look like oppositionality. It could look like big anger problems. So as we go through some of these quotes, you might think, oh yeah, I've heard this or seen this before. So the first one thing I might hear from a parent is he's not paying attention. We have to remember, when it comes to anxiety, kids are often, worried, they're distracted, they're thinking about things that have happened earlier in the day, thinking about things that might happen later. They're worried about their work or production, who might be looking at them, if the teacher's going to call on them, and that could certainly come across as someone who's inattentive. They might be thinking about a sick parent, grandparent. This is what they come to school in that backpack that we are going to have to navigate, especially now. He can't sit still. Another common presentation, we might see kids who are pacing. There's a physiological response with anxiety. They might be more fidgety, have a hard time sitting still, moving about. It's hard to regulate internally. I might hear, she won't leave my side. This really hits at those kids, especially the younger kids who might be having difficulty separating from their parents. They might have difficulty with leaving their parent to go to school, to say goodbye to go to school. We might see some of that with the teachers who form relationships with kids. They might not want to leave your side. He's not turning in his work unless it's perfect. Kids with anxiety may present with some perfectionistic tendencies. It has to look right. They're judging themselves. They're worried about the judgment they're going to get. She freezes up when she needs to talk to others. This hits at a couple different conditions. You know, one that is wildly misunderstood at times is selective mutism. You might have a kid who's able to, you know, demonstrates all typical social behaviors in some situations. Then they get into some situations where they just absolutely freeze up and don't talk. These kids are often described as oppositional, certainly anxious, but they're overwhelmed and they can't communicate like they would in other situations, or they might whisper. It also hits at kids who are socially anxious, who might avoid social situations altogether. She tantrums, yells, screams. She could be aggressive, hits others. We have to remember that with anxiety, we often see, especially in younger kids, this externalizing response. They become dysregulated. Their reactions are disproportionate from whatever trigger we saw. Keep that in mind. And they could be out of control. He refuses to go to school, and when he does, I end up having to pick him up early. I mentioned just a moment ago about school phobia. Now, there are certainly pathways to school phobia. That could be there's something that the child is accessing at home, or they don't want to leave the home because of something, or when they get to school, there's just a system of anxiety-provoking situations that they have to navigate, which makes them want to avoid school. But this is certainly something to stay vigilant about as we all transition back. I should also note that typically when kids transition back to school, or kids starting school for the first time, we see a difficult adjustment, and that's fairly common. He worries constantly. Again, this is a condition where kids are thinking about what happened, what might happen to others, what others thought of them, their grades, their social performance. They're nervous. She needs it her way. It's always got to be her way. Well, kids with anxiety tend to become black and white and rigid. It's a way to gain control over their environment. My belly hurts. Very common. We see physical symptoms with belly aches and headaches and neck aches, racing pulse, nausea. My brain tells me to do it. I've heard that comment many times, or I hear voices telling me to do it. Obviously, when you hear something like that, you might think there's some sort of psychosis or psychotic break or something. Most often, it has to do with anxiety. Their kids experience intrusive thoughts. They're hard to control their thoughts. I'm scared that something will happen to mommy. Again, going back to the separation anxiety, worrying that something bad will happen to a parent, a grandparent, wanting to stay home in order to stay close to them. This next one always hurts my heart a little bit when I hear a kid say, I hate school, or no one likes me. Certainly, things pile up for the anxious kid. School becomes very punishing, and they want to avoid it. Or, you know, I can only imagine if you're in an environment that could be fearful, or you're worrying constantly, I would strongly dislike it too. And especially if you think kids are always going to make fun of you. And then you tend to hear a parent say something along these terms. I was the same way when I was a kid. Kind of speaks to this, genetic predisposition, Where kids are anxious, we tend to find families who have anxiety in the family. Could be biological, could be just, model behavior, reinforced behavior, but we tend to see this as well. And something to consider as we move along here and think about reintegrating into school, an anxiety situation likely exacerbates whatever anxiety is already in the home, and it certainly rubs off on the child. So we talked about some common symptoms and presentations. This is a fairly straightforward breakdown of the most common anxiety-related conditions in childhood. So we talked about generalized anxiety. This is where kids they worry, they're nervous, they feel restless or tense. And it's not just situation specific, although certain situations will likely exacerbate it. These are kids who are worriers. Separation anxiety, we talked about kids who don't want to leave their parents' side. They have trouble sleeping alone, going places in the house alone. They may feign illness in order to stay home. They're worried about their parents, something terrible happening to them. And again, couching this with COVID right now, where we are getting messages that individuals are getting sick, and we have a high death rate, and kids are experiencing loss of grandparents and family friends and whatnot, you can see why we might see an uptick in this. Specific phobia, we talked about school phobia and school refusal. This could be a very, very challenging thing for kids, for the school system. And when I say the effects on the family is significant, I can't stress that enough. When a child won't go to school because they're anxious about stuff that's happening in school, it could create real challenges for the family system. Social anxiety, we talked a little bit about. Kids who feel judged in social situations, worried how others might view them. You might see more withdrawn behaviors. And then, similar to that is performance anxiety. I mean, if you think about social anxiety, you have to perform socially. Performance anxiety, doing a presentation, taking a test, answering a question in class. Kids with performance anxiety, you will likely see a bit more of the avoidance. Anything from looking away, looking down, not turning something in, or finding ways to exit the room. Selective mutism, we mentioned. Kids who in most situations they seem okay, in certain situations they cannot get themselves to communicate with words, or they might whisper. Often we see families compensating by talking for them, ordering for them at restaurants and things of that nature. Obsessive compulsive disorder. This is either obsessions or compulsions or both. Kids who are flooded with anxious, irrational thoughts that they have a difficult time managing, could lead to actions that help relieve those fears or those intrusive thoughts. Sometimes we have kids who are, they have compulsive behaviors that we can't see. Take a child who is having to do some writing, and they're worried that their writing is going to be terrible. It has to look a certain way, and the child starts doing some compulsive counting in their head, or rereading and rereading all the words. That could obviously create problems for kids who are trying to get work done or even taking tests. The last one, anxiety related to trauma, loss, or adjustment. I mean, this could be a presentation all to itself, especially right now. My colleague, Susan Goldman from First Children, is going to be doing a presentation related to this. Certainly, anxiety related to loss, not just loss of family members or close friends, but loss of being with friends, or going to camp, or school. And I mentioned it later, school is like a home away from home for some kids, and to have that major interruption can cause some real distress. And now we have to adjust to go back to school after all of this is happening. I'll go through this and then I'll take a quick pause. I want to get some water and see if there's any questions right away. Talking about COVID, so the early research that's coming out, folks are saying that more than 20% of students exhibited some level of anxiety or depression within that first month of quarantine. So thinking back from March to April. Now that makes sense, right? I mean, thinking about this major disruption, a pandemic, again, the images and the news that we were all getting, parents who may have lost their jobs, kids can't go to school, they can't see their friends. It's a major adjustment. But something else to keep in mind, kids who were accessing all those mental health services at school no longer receiving those services. Now, I know schools did everything they could to make sure students were getting what they needed, especially in the mental health continuum. But a lot of them stopped receiving services. Those kids who were getting services privately more than likely had a major disruption in continuing access. And then folks within the family who were getting mental health services and treatment may have had a disruption. Now, just as a frame of reference, under normal situations, normal circumstances, we can expect over the course of a student's academic trajectory, about 20% are going to have some level, mild to significant, mild to severe, social emotional concern or behavioral concern. What the research is saying now is that we can expect those rates to double or triple after COVID started, after the quarantine, as we navigate our way back. So when I say that, you know, we're unpacking backpacks here, we have to be extra proactive and vigilant in understanding those signs and those symptoms, and have some, I guess, tools in our toolkit to best help these kids and help these families. Sonia, do you want to stop here just for a moment? If there's anything clarification that folks need, if I went too fast over something?
Sure. So I'm looking through the poll and I don't see any questions regarding the presentation, but if anyone has any, feel free to unmute yourself now and ask away. Looks like you're crystal clear, Jeff.
All right, good. So what does some of this look like in school? So first, I found this quote. I thought it was it spoke to the situation right now. Anxiety comes from the difficulty of operating with uncertainty, and there is a lot of uncertainty right now. We'll be talking more about how to leverage this uncertainty with kids to make things more predictable, to help them feel more in control of things, and just keeping in mind that anxiety very often, like the quote says, comes from kids having not knowing how to handle certain aversive situations, certainly the unpredictability, and right now that is definitely current. So what to look for? So like I said earlier, it's common for kids to have difficulty separating from parents during those first few days of school. If we see this become more and more of an issue over time, where the child is just dysregulated and they're unable to participate and wanting to go home and crying, then we have to start thinking about putting intervention in place. School attendance problems and Zoom avoidance. So as we talked about, kids with anxiety often find ways to stay home. They try to avoid situations that create or that are anxiety provoking for them in school. If it becomes an anxiety provoking situation, they're going to do what they can to stay home. They're going to have those physical symptoms, so we want to be able to check in with parents. Zoom avoidance. Let's face it, it's not always easy to be working in front of a computer when you have your video showing yourself. So some kids feel very self-conscious about that. And we're going to have to think about creative, flexible ways for those kids to participate without putting them in a situation that's going to cause all that nervousness. Frequent sick days, again, tied to school attendance, and trips to the nurse. Now, trips to the nurse is going to be tricky this time around. again, just to remind you that kids with anxiety, they're going to present sometimes with stomach aches and belly aches, racing pulse, nausea, headaches, dizziness. If we start to see these signs and they start going to the nurse, especially during COVID, we're going to be extra vigilant to health concerns, but it might take a little bit more assessment to find out what is going on with this child, especially if there's no medical cause. Regression in development, some of the younger kids might become more clingy. They might, again, they may not want to separate from parents. We might see more accidents, bedwetting, poor sleep. And then with our kids on the autism spectrum, most kids with autism, or a lot of kids with autism have, certain preoccupations or special interests. We might see those kids fall more into those preoccupations. It could be soothing for them, but if it starts to become an issue where they're not participating as they were before, again, we might want to put intervention in place there. The disruptive behavior we talked about, we talked about tantrums and meltdowns and difficulty regulating behavior. Panic it's scary, especially for a child, that their body would react so out of control or so fearfully over something that would otherwise be benign, like turning in an assignment. It could be very disorienting. But we're not just seeing disruptive behavior in these major escalations. We're seeing a lot of pacing. We're seeing a lot of, again, the fidgety behavior. We're seeing reassurance seeking, excessive assurance seeking, questions. There was one more thing I wanted to mention about that. Oh, and pacing. If you've seen a child with anxiety in the classroom, see them walking back and forth, checking and looking and seeing what everybody else is doing. Yes, there's that restlessness. Yes, they might have some underlying overactivity, but if it's coming from anxiety, boy, that must be really hard for that child and distracting for the other kids. The moodiness and the irritability, oppositionality. We might see some more in-between episodes, irritability. And then below average homework and test results. Kids who are not turning things in, tests that are not complete, kids who are refusing to turn in work. Again, these all might be signs that they're having difficulty getting through. There might be something going on at home, or they're just feeling extra self-conscious in completing work. Okay, how are we with time? Okay, perfect. So we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about what we can do to help. I'm heavy-handed on this part, so there is a pretty extensive list of strategies and things to do. And I encourage you when we're done, just to have a few of these ready. And they all, again, that theme of being compassionate and empathic, you're going to see that repeated several times. We want school to be a safe, predictable environment. We want to do everything we can for that. For some kids, it's really the home away from home. They want to know that what they're coming into is going to look like it did yesterday. And we as educators, we shouldn't just look at ourselves as change agents. Our whole system can play a role in helping kids. It could go from an individualized intervention or even a check-in to a full system of support. Let's look at how we might be able to do that. So how to help students. So the first thing is we want to make sure that that uncertainty, those things that can serve as antecedents for anxiety, the fact that kids don't know what to expect and they're seeking reassurance, we want to turn that into empowerment. Let's make sure they know that there are things that they can control. They can control washing hands. They can control wearing a mask. They can control distancing and whatnot. We don't want them to feel like they can't control things. If they feel that way, they're more likely to feel anxious about things. Encourage them to use deep breathing and anxiety reduction activities. You do a Google search, you're going to find 10,000 articles on how to do deep breathing. and progressive muscle relaxation and other mindfulness activities. There's a reason for that. That's an evidence-based practice. We have to teach kids how to calm the physiological response. Now, this is something an individual student can learn, or we can do it as a full class. We can do a mindfulness activity in the beginning of a class, high school down to preschool. We can talk about how to do belly breaths and talk about other types of relaxation strategies just to start the day. And then we can praise the kids for doing it throughout the day. This one we've all seen. It's a spin on catch 'em being good. Let's make sure we're giving frequent positive attention when things go well. We want to be able to be specific and in real time for these guys. What a wonderful job you did being flexible when that mic went out during Zoom. Wow, you were so brave earlier when you answered that question. You know, I could tell it was tricky for you, and you really did a wonderful job pushing through it. I'm so proud of you. Lay it on thick for those kids who would otherwise avoid it. Make sure we're discussing COVID in an appropriate, developmentally appropriate, straightforward, factual way. I don't need to tell you all how much information, misinformation, conspiracy there is out there. Kids can be spoken to about what it is, how it's affecting school, and that we want to make sure they're safe. We don't need to downplay it. We don't need to exacerbate or exaggerate it, and we can stick to the facts. For those kids who are having a hard time separating, let's get in front of it. We can anticipate. So let's have them have opportunities to call home if they want to. Otherwise, they might be in the bathroom texting and calling their parent anyway. If they want to keep pictures of their family close by on their desk, if they want to bring a transitional object with them to school or have a stuffed animal right here on the Zoom, I think we can let that happen. Let's accommodate the Zoom experience. Gracious. I've seen in some situations some real rigidity from schools when it comes to Zoom. Let's not expect all kids just to sit down, check in, be in Zoom, and check out as if nothing's happening. Some kids are feeling anxious. There's ways that we can change the screen so only their forehead is showing if they're feeling anxious about people seeing them. There's ways for them to, you know what? I notice you're having a hard time with this. Why don't we do this? Keep your screen on for the first 10 seconds, then you can turn it off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do comprehension checks to make sure you're following along. For those kids who are extremely restless, or they're pacing around, or they have a hard time sitting still for any reason, I wonder if we can find a way to get them Bluetooth earphones so they can still participate but move around as much as they want. A lot of times these kids pay attention better when they're moving around. So we have to find ways to be flexible. Check in, check out. Has some really nice anecdotal evidence to support it for kids who have challenging behavior, kids who are anxious. All we're looking for is to find a preferred adult, safe person. The child can check in with at the beginning of the day. Hey, how you doing this morning? Did you have your breakfast? Awesome. You ready to have a great day? I'm so happy to see you. Have them go through the day. They go to leave. Hey man, how'd you do? Were you able to participate in class today? Oh, I heard you did awesome when you answered that question. Have a great day. It was great to see you. Is there anything you need for when you go home and you do Zoom tomorrow? Let's make sure kids have a take a break pass if they're starting to feel nervous. Teachers, child study team members, parents, we can come up with a plan for when a child is feeling nervous. Now it's tricky in COVID, I know, having kids wander the halls or whatever, but kids might need to be able to leave the classroom, and taking a break is a good strategy for kids to learn rather than doing it in a maladaptive way. Peer buddies might be tricky. Historically, this has been helpful. We have to keep distancing in mind. And don't hesitate to check in general with your kids. We can do it in a way that's welcoming, non-stigmatizing, And I think about Ross Green, who had a very simple strategy for opening up dialogue with a kid, and that is, and I'll play it out, hey, I noticed you put your head down when I called on you. What's up? What's going on? Or, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been participating in our Zoom lessons. What's up? Allow there to be some space. Fall back on empathy if they have a hard time communicating. Let them know that you're there to listen, and then we're not making any assumptions. Have a catch-up plan for kids who are missing schoolwork and school days. Those kids who are anxious will most likely get anxious if things start to pile up. Practice, practice, practice those new procedures and ease back into the routine. Again, we have seen very flexible teachers and very inflexible or rigid folks who have a very specific way of things going. This is a different experience for kids. Now, we want to make sure there are boundaries and there are consistent messaging. There is consistent messaging, but we don't want to assume that they're just going to come back in and the routine is just like that, like it never changed. For the younger kids, make it fun. Have them sing a song while they wash their hands for 20 seconds. For the older kids, we can have a little humility and be silly when it comes to certain things, as long as we're reinforcing safety and precautions. We want to make sure that we're modeling our coping skills and our problem-solving skills. We want to remain calm. We want to model kindness and compassion, that some kids are going to have a harder time, teachers are going to have a harder time, parents are going to have a harder time. So just show them how you demonstrate problem-solving and flexibility. You don't need to have all the answers. I don't need to tell teachers that. You know that. It's something you've told yourself before, but especially right now. Have a plan, collaborate, lean on others, talk to others. If a therapist is involved with a child, if we can carve out, and I know how difficult it is to carve out 5-10 minutes to chat with a therapist or a parent, or to respond to email in the evening. I know. It can go a long way, and you can be informed on how to best help the child. If a child is feeling socially anxious or lacking confidence, let's make sure that we're calling on them in areas that they have strong knowledge about. Have them feel more confident. More likely they'll be able to participate again in the future if they're starting to feel like they can answer it and they can do it. They can get over that hurdle of nervousness. It's like low-hanging fruit. For those kids who tend to take long because they're worried or they're nervous or they're repeating their thoughts over and over again during an exam, let's give them extra time. Now, I know we have to navigate 504 plans and IEPs and all those things. At some point, we're going to have to do just what makes sense, even if it's in the short term. I like this one, and I think we're all trying to do this more, especially right now, is to get outside. It's a good distraction, and it's a good opportunity for kids to use their mindfulness opportunities and their mindfulness activities. I mentioned empathize, and I said it again, and I have it written here. We can always do it. We can always pay attention. We can always empathize. It's something that we'll always have in our toolkit. It doesn't cost anything just to say, hey man, I could tell this is tough. This is real hard, but you're doing so well. I'm so proud of you for coming today. Boy, that must have been difficult. Praise the process rather than the outcome. For those kids, especially those kids who are anxious about grades and turning things in on time, let's pay attention to what they're doing in the moment. I love how you got started on the work. What a wonderful job you did taking your book out and reading the passage. What a wonderful job you're doing. Rather than, I liked how you got that A on your test. Let's focus on what they're doing and they'll do it more. Of course, give notice, give heads up before any transition or break in routine. Social stories, you can go to Carol Gray's website. Oftentimes these can be helpful, especially when they're a component of a larger intervention or if they're short term. Social stories can help kids learn new skills, gives them a roadmap for what to do and how to act in certain situations, how to ask for help, especially for our younger ones, how to remain socially distant and wash hands and all those things. Let kids know in some way that you're going to call on them, and let them know if they're ready. If you have an anxious kid, let them know that their turn is coming and give them an opportunity to say, no, I can't right now. Again, I'd rather that communication than some sort of maladaptive response that will eventually be reinforced. This you can reflect on. This you can say, I loved how you let me know. That's a first step. For our families, who are watching, families who you want to help, make sure they know to check in and validate their kids. Let's not assume that all the kids know exactly what's going on and that they don't have any questions or concerns. Beyond just the how was your day. Ensure that kids are getting the right type of sleep. They're engaging in healthy habits and their physical activity is up there. Let's give them those Zoom breaks. I don't care what anyone says. You sit in front of a computer long enough, it could be disorienting. Let's make sure that there's a good balance and encourage kids to do what they enjoy. Now, some parents will tell me, well, my kids just love to be on the computer and playing games. Okay, but let's make sure we're giving a good balance also, not just Fortnite with friends and Zoom school, but also playing board games or relaxing with a book or just putting some distance between the screen and their eyes with TV. Set the child up for success. And I say this and I empathize with families. This is hard stuff. We're balancing so much. We're balancing our own work, our own stress, and everything else. It's going to be hard, and it's not going to be easy into the fall. So what can we do on the front end? What can we do to set kids up before that Zoom lesson? Make sure all their materials are there. If they need a checklist, to make sure they have everything they need. During the Zoom, and I keep calling it Zoom, but unless there's another platform, if during the virtual lesson they need their materials, let's make sure it's there. Let's make sure their snack is there, their water bottle is there, and they know how to take breaks. And then after, making sure that their work is going to be done. They know exactly what they need to do. If they have questions for the teacher, how can we help them ask them? Let's make sure that our kids are engaging in social activities. This I found during the last part of the school year and into the summer. This was parents' number one thing that, it was almost like, forget school. How can I get my kids to see other kids? We may have to get creative. We may have to have these virtual activities. There are and recreational things that are being done, not only for free, but are opening up with proper precautions. Something to look into. Practice relaxation strategies of your own. Do it as a family. Again, Google best ways to take deep breaths, how to practice regulating stress. We talked about self-care. Take care of yourselves. Go easy on yourselves. Nobody bats 1,000 for my baseball fans out there. You can't do everything exactly perfect the way you want it to be all the time. We're doing what we can given the circumstances. Also, it's okay for kids to feel a little stressed. I know we're talking a lot about anxiety here and preventing. It's okay. They learn how to solve problems. Problem solving is one of the most important things for kids to learn, especially when they have to deal with anxiety. So let's continue to model how we handle stress in healthy ways. And be okay with kids feeling some stress. Do things as a family. Monitor your own news intake. Gracious. How often do we get on our phones and look at Facebook, and next thing you know, it's 45 minutes and I'm looking at one thing about people arguing back and forth about something. Take breaks from that. Take breaks from the news. I read in another article this. I thought the author summed it up well. These doomsday apocalypse kind of stories, these mental health fake news reports where it's just intended to drive you into stress. Take breaks from that. Focus on the present and rely on your routines. Don't assume the kids are ready. Preview as much as possible what they can expect. You know, you're going to go to school, you're going to see your teachers wearing masks. You may see some wearing gloves. They may take your temperature before you go into school. Let's think about what that might be like for you. Allow them to ask questions. Role play it. Be vulnerable and tell them, yeah, it would make me nervous too. I can see that. But here are some of the ways that you can gain control over this. And here are the ways that you can handle it. And let's practice that. For teachers, remember, we cannot completely eliminate all the risks. We need to learn to tolerate uncertainty. For those of you who've been in the field long enough, you know that every day is not going to be 100% predictable. But life is uncertain. For those of you who are very nervous about going back during this time, we do everything we can for safety and we take all of our precautions, but there's always going to be a degree of risk. Life itself is uncertain. Manage your expectations and be kind to yourself. Think about what you can do given the circumstances. I write here, shift your perspective and manage your double standard thinking. What I mean by that is it's a thinking trap. Thinking that you should have done X, Y, and Z the best possible way. That you were down on yourself for not being 100% prepared for Zoom school on that one day. That you missed something. Imagine if your colleague was saying that to you. You would likely say something like, "What are you talking about? Sounds like you did just fine. Remember the circumstances we're in. This is tough. This is hard." Remind yourself of that. And remember that it's not all on you. The responsibility here is shared. It's shared with parents, with the students, administration, greater systemic agencies. It's not all on you. It may sometimes feel that way, but it's not. Pay attention to your own thoughts and feelings and behavior and reach out if you're finding that you're under stress that you can't find relief from. Lean on your coworkers and your peers. Find time to find humor in your job again and find ways to think of things as positive in your work, in your students, in your family. One of the things that I cherish about my time working in schools and in organizations is when I laugh with colleagues. Find that funny colleague and laugh, especially when things are hard. Get creative. Find that creative energy in you to be able to deliver a message. Remember that being online in this school, this platform is a way to connect with your students. It's a way for them to connect with you and connect with their peers. We can get creative with that. We can get creative with the surroundings. Manage your intake of information. Same thing. If you find yourself just watching news all the time, and listen, I do it too, but if you're starting to find that you're feeling even worse when you're done, just balance it and collaborate and reach out. Reach out if you know that, or if you think kids are hurting in some way, or if you're having trouble, or if your coworker is having difficulty, or parents are overwhelmed. Reach out. There are folks out there who want to help, who will help. Don't go at it alone. We're just about at an hour. That concludes what I have to say. I hope that this was helpful. I hope there are some things in there that you'll be able to use. A fresh outlook, maybe, new information, but certainly ways that we can best help our kids. So here's our contact information. My email is there. I will respond if you have follow-up questions, or if you even have questions just in general about school or mental health or challenging behavior or what First Children can do or any other providers. My goal is to help you. So that's my information right there, our intake line there and our referrals email. So please reach out if you'd like.
So we do have a couple of questions from the chat. So I'm just going to read them to you. The first one is, what can I do to help my 7-year-old boy who is pulling and eating his lashes? I've tried many manipulatives and tips for him, but nothing has worked.
Okay, I'm going to just repeat that. I want to make sure I understood. We have a child who's hair pulling and pulling eyelashes. Go on.
Yeah, so he's 7 years old and he's pulling and eating his lashes, and mom has tried many manipulatives and tips for him, but nothing has worked.
Okay. One thing just to know that there is very, and this will take us outside of the scope, but I'd be happy to email and talk to you about it. There are very effective treatments. If you needed help finding a referral, look for somebody who does cognitive behavior therapy or behavior therapy, specifically habit reversal training. We want kids who are pulling hair or pulling eyelashes. We want to do a good enough assessment to see why it's happening, how the child can be more mindful of internal or external triggers, how the behavior is being reinforced, and how we can replace the behavior with something else. We know how to do it. Sometimes manipulatives alone is not enough. But there certainly are services out there that can be very effective. I'd be happy to chat with you more, but something like that would likely take us down a road where we'll be talking for quite a while.
Okay, and I can put a resource in the chat for Center for Emotional Health, who does specialize in a lot of disorders like OCD, and they do and working kids with Tourette's, and they do habit reversal therapy. So I'll just put that link in there for you because they're very helpful.
And please email me, and I'd be happy to lean on the resources I know in your area.
And then we have at least one more question. Sorry, I'm going back to the chat to get to that question. And it is, okay. I've noticed more anxiety on the educators than the students. Educators are reluctant to return to school, even if students are not present. And Jeff, can you address that?
Yeah. Listen, there's a lot of reasons why folks will feel anxious right now. A lot of teachers are feeling like they don't want to bring illness home to their home. They might be feeling like they don't want to get their students sick. There's a lot of, goodness gracious, new systems in school that we're sort of learning on the fly. But I think some of the best ways to handle that is to leverage those fears or that nervousness and come up with the things that you can do to make it less risky, more predictable. And certainly if there are things happening in your life, like the stress in your family, we want to make sure that you are taken care of. There are people out there who can work with adults on managing anxiety. But I would make sure that you are addressing this with your team in your school, administrators, and again, to do the best you can to make things as prepared as possible.
Okay, so I just want to mention a couple things before people start to drop off. In case you missed it, we will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation by email to everyone who registered or put their name in the chat. Also, it might take me a little longer because I have a very slow computer, but I'll be adding this entire webinar onto our website so you can watch it or share it with others. And please write your full name in the chat if you haven't done so already, so I can make sure that I send you a professional development certificate. That way I know that you were here. And I just want to look for any more questions. And thank you, everyone who wrote tips and resources in the chat. Thank you so much. Like someone just mentioned, she wanted to add the dancing to the tips to the families. So they do a dance party at the end of the day. Okay, so someone asked, they have a student who has been punching holes in the walls of his home due to his father's death. He clearly needs anger management and grief training. What other prevention techniques would you recommend? The student has better grades in school rather than home.
He has what in school?
Better grades in school rather than home.
I'm sorry, he has better what in school?
Better grades in school rather than home. But and correct me if I'm wrong, the question is more about helping him with his anger and grief. Is that
Right. Certainly, if we're seeing that type of response after the death of a father, first of all, I agree that finding counseling for this child would be really important, and for the family, and having some sort of safety plan in place. If he's punching holes in walls, we want to make sure that everybody is safe in the house, including him. He's going to need how to learn. He's going to have to learn how to de-escalate and seek help and manage those strong feelings without it being so disruptive. But I would reach out and find a therapist for sure.
okay?